One thing is for certain. Just because it's tried and true doesn't mean it's working right now. So the big question is this: where can you learn what is working right now? The strategies, the tactics, the psychology, and the exact how-to. How to grow your business. How to blow up your personal brand and supercharge your personal growth. That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answer. My name is Sharran Srivatsaa, and welcome to Business School. One of the cool things about having a great podcast and love my community is that they get to interact, ask questions, and this is one of those cases where this was very audience community generated. And I want to tell a very quick story of how we came to be, because a lot of questions came about on not just investing, but how to use the retirement vehicles to actually invest. And I posted in my community, and a couple of your clients connected you, and here we are. So there is 6 degrees of separation, which is kind of very, very cool. So thank you for being here and sharing your wisdom with us.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for asking me. Happy to answer, whatever questions. I mean, self-directed IRAs they're just exploding, and every day they get more popular. So yeah.
We have listeners from around the world. And the cool part about this is, while this may be very US centric, the one thing I will say is I've been working with a couple of folks in Australia right now, and they have something called a super fund, very similar to their IRA. And I think conceptually, the things that you're talking about from a strategy perspective could work as well. So if you are listening and you're not from the US, this may not be tactically applicable, but I think this would be philosophically applicable. So stick around, because Karen's going to drop some cool stuff. So before we even get into the self-directed stuff, my curiosity for you is this. This is a very kind of niche field. Talk us through how you got to doing this.
You mean when I was a little girl, did I dream of self-directing IRAs? Is that what you mean? Yeah, kind of. No, it's funny because I got into real estate and property management, then loan servicing and loan origination as the years went by. And then a company was opening an office where I live here in California, and they hired me with that background. And it was the perfect background, because what people invest in with self-directed IRAs is almost always tied to real estate, unless it's precious metals or something, but it's usually tied to real estate. So I understand from upwards and backwards and forwards about how real estate works. So I understand the asset class. Learning IRAs wasn't that hard, because an IRA, it's just like a bucket that holds assets.
Right.
And what makes it self-directed is that you can put alternative assets in those buckets. So since I already had the database and all the connections of people in the real estate, area in that world, it just was a match made in heaven, and it all came together. So yeah, that was awesome. 2007.
Awesome. Very cool. So I'd love to talk about, maybe walk folks through, mechanically speaking, who have not, actually utilized a self-directed vehicle. And the funny part is I had to go through this myself about 10 years ago, and I used a self-directed vehicle. I had no idea this existed. So I literally was learning on my own, had no one to talk to. I wish this podcast was around then, at least had a primer for it.
Yeah.
Let's assume that you're talking to an entrepreneur, business owner that has an existing retirement vehicle of sorts.
Okay.
And if, let's say that's the base right now, they don't know much about, and the only option they have is it's either at a Schwab or a TD Ameritrade or whatever, and they're invested in some spiders or some ETFs. Right. From that point, so I'm there, and now I have, let's take a real estate example, because you've done that really well. And I'm considering investing in a single family home in Tulsa, Oklahoma for $100,000. Use that as an example, right?
Absolutely.
So how do I go from having over the last 10 years, putting money away into this Roth or a traditional IRA at a TD Ameritrade? How do I take that? And what is the mechanics from there to investing in this single family or this rental home in Tulsa, Oklahoma?
Well, the word is transfer. And when you've got an IRA, you want to move it into a self-directed IRA. That is not a taxable event. You just fill out our transfer form and you sign it after you open an account. Right. Fill out our transfer form and sign it. then we sign it, we send it to that custodian, and they move the money over. That's essentially how it works. At the most, it takes 2 weeks. It just doesn't take that long to get the money. It's usually a lot shorter to get the money in your account, and then you can invest. So it's not complicated. But say, for example, you used to work somewhere, now you don't work there anymore, and they had a 401k or a 403b or 457, you can take that old employer plan. That's called a rollover. So you open the account, you call that previous employer's plan administrator and say, hey, I'd like to do a rollover. And then you fill out their paperwork. And then they'll create the check, and then they'll send it over into your new self-directed account. And then you can invest in alternative assets.
So awesome. This is cool. So first thing we do is we have to create this self-directed account, right? And so there's got to be, again, like you said, a container for holding the assets in some way.
That's right.
Then if it's kind of like, if it's from you to you, or like from your IRA to your IRA, it is a transfer. So there's no taxable event for that.
Or a direct rollover if it's an employer plan. Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. So now I have my assets saved from $100,000 in my TD Ameritrade account. I have that, and I've moved, say, 80,000 over to your team, which is great, and I have that. What happens next? Like, what happens after that?
Well, okay, we're looking to buy a $100,000 asset that you mentioned, this house, single family house in Tulsa, this imaginary home. Yeah. So what we want to do is, first off, if you're only going to move over 80K, then that means you've got to come up with the rest somehow. So let's talk about it. Typically, what you want to do is you want to leave a pad in there, because you're going to have expenses. 100% of the expenses of an IRA-owned asset have to be paid for by the IRA. So it's a closing costs. It's rehab, which is so much fun to do, but it needs to be paid for by the IRA, right? So all that money has to come over. So if you've got 80 grand, well, maybe if you've got 100 grand at TD, maybe you want to move it all over. But if you come up short, what you probably could do is you could borrow money. But this is so important. It's really the number one misunderstanding with self-directed IRAs. And that is, you just don't go to your bank to get that kind of money for a loan. That you get, it's a special loan. It's called a non-recourse loan. And if any of your listeners would like to have a list, I'd be happy to shoot it over to them. Just email me at info@udirectira.com, and I'll shoot you the list of non-recourse lenders. But it's a special kind of loan, it's a commercial loan. It's not made to you, the person, which is great. Yeah. And it's great because it's not about, you're not going to get your credit checked. It's not about how long you've worked at your job. It's just about that asset. How is it going to cash flow? Then these non-recourse lenders can lend money to your IRA account, so your IRA account can invest. And that's great. And it's, it can go pretty simply, but there's a real big thing, like a takeaway here. And what that is that if your IRA does borrow money, your IRA is going to pay this kind of tax, right? It's called UDFI, unrelated debt financed income tax. You need to know that, because your IRA is going to pay that tax too. So you really have to be prepared. You got to know about it. But then when your tax person is doing that calculation, what they can do is even take out expenses so the tax isn't as much as it might be. So you have your tax person do the 990T, that's a tax form, and your IRA will pay any UDFI that's owed. And there you go. And that's how you do it.
Awesome. So I randomly came up with the 80K, and I think this opened up a couple of cool things for us. Mm-hmm. This non-recourse lender, which I think is interesting. I'm glad we're talking about this. So let's say the purchase price is $100,000 for this asset. Yeah. I have $80,000 in IRA-based equity that I'm bringing to the deal, right? In this case, self-directed IRAs. Are you saying that the difference, which is the 20,000 plus expenses, I can actually get what would be in place of a mortgage? I can get that in place. That's the lending.
Yes, exactly.
Wow. Awesome.
Right. And you got to have that pad. You definitely have to have that pad. But yes, so then you could mix your own IRA money with this non-recourse lending money, this loan, and you can do that. That's great. And just remember that you have to file a 990T. Your IRA files a 990T and pays any UDFI tax that's owed. And by the way, if so you've got some people that like the rule book, they can look up the UDFI in the IRS's website. It's irs.gov, publication 598.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, the team will link that up. So the question I have is, okay, so I've got, I moved this 80K over. There's this $100,000 property. I'm going to give it a little padding. So I go with the idea. I get this non-recourse lender. I'm able to borrow, say, 30,000. So I have $110,000 available in my self-directed account to go purchase this property.
Right.
Now, once I go, say everything works, I go purchase this property. The property's title is in the name of the IRA, correct?
It is. That's exactly right. And the IRA owns the asset. You own the IRA owns the asset, precisely.
So let's talk about that. So IRA owns the asset. A lot of people invest in real estate and they're like, hey, I'm doing this because I can, especially real estate professionals that can get, depreciation pass through and things like that. And since the IRA is the owner, how does that play in?
It doesn't. You're not filing your IRA. You're not passing through. If you do owe the UDFI tax, then you'll be able to deduct some things. But typically, it's not like investing with cash. The tax benefit you get is that the proceeds grow tax deferred in a typical IRA or traditional IRA, or tax free in a Roth. But if it's a SEP, a traditional IRA, it grows tax deferred. If it's a Roth, it grows tax free for life. And that's where you really catch the brass ring, because you invest, right? And even if you get the tax breaks when you invest personally, when you get that liquidity event, all that money comes back to you, well, then that's taxable to you. In an IRA, when your IRA buys that property in Tulsa, sells it, the proceeds come back, that isn't diminished by tax. So you can compound faster because all that money from the sale, all of it goes back out into the next deal. And then you can just do it over again and keep doing it and building that nest egg.
Awesome. So cool. So here's the second question. How does it work can you blend? So can for this $100,000 investment in Tulsa, let's say I had $25,000 personally to invest in it. Could I co-invest alongside my self-directed IRA?
Well, some people will tell you yes. I would say don't do that. I believe it's DOL 2000-10 that says that you can do it, but and that's only if you meet certain requirements. However, if you get audited by the IRS, they're going to take a look at your IRA and they're going to ask, hey, did you get personal benefit from your IRA? So say, for example, you invested 50-50 with yourself in your IRA, which I don't recommend, and then here come proceeds. And so now you're personally receiving some rent from that property that your IRA partnered on. How do you say you didn't benefit personally? I mean, if you're a lawyer and you want to split hairs and talk about what is correct, in a book sense or mathematically, but I think that when it comes to the IRS, they would take a look at that and say, did you receive personal benefit? Personal benefit is a prohibited transaction. So you might have to hire a lawyer and sort that one out. So I just stay away from investing personally with an IRA. Personal benefit is prohibited. And so we should talk about who's disallowed to the IRA, right? Yeah. So you're disallowed your IRA. Your lineal ascendants and descendants are disallowed to the IRA. So you can, but in this case, there is an exception. So assuming that neither you nor this disallowed person owned the property beforehand, and you invested concurrently, like you closed on title at the same time, you can do that with a disallowed person. You can do that. So that's good.
Yeah.
But you're never going to sell that property to a disallowed person.
Got it. So what you're saying is my son could be a co-investor with my self-directed IRA at the same time of closing title on that property.
As long as your son has an IRA or cash or something, and in order for your son to have an IRA, he has to have earned income from a job.
What if my son was not using an IRA? If he was just investing personally and
money?
I was going, yeah.
Yeah, I guess he could. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. So there is, while it may be a little complex, there is a way to co-invest alongside your self-directed IRA.
No, not with yourself, but with other parties.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Is there any way what is the difference between what is disallowed? Is that the same as the self-dealing rules? Is that what that is?
Well, prohibited transactions include self-dealing rules. So it's a list of rules that you can find on the Internal Revenue Code. It's IRC 4975, lists all the prohibited transactions. For example, an extension of credit to the IRA is prohibited. Receiving personal benefit, offering services to the IRA or the IRA-owned asset is prohibited. So there are some things you definitely want to stay away from, and that's what we do. And when someone calls us and they want to open an account, we're going to talk to them and say, well, tell us about your deal. What are you looking to do? And who are the parties involved? Because we really want to hear that asset, who's involved, and does it sound prohibited? And if it does, we can say, well, hey, this, you might want to consider this. You know, we don't tell you what to invest in, but we can give you some guidance on what may or may not be what we call a PT, prohibited transaction.
Got it. Okay, cool. So, so if it's not, we should probably just, you know, before we invest through a self-directed IRA, even when we talk to a custodian, we want to at least double check to make sure that it's not a prohibited transaction anyway. It checks all the boxes that we're in.
Or call us and say, hey, is this prohibited? I'm not sure. You know, then we'd be happy to answer that question.
Got it. Okay, awesome. There is, I'd love for you to maybe talk about if an IRA is involved, is the only way to get financing on a real estate deal to go through that non-recourse lender, or will have, in your experience, have other mortgage-based lenders, would they consider doing stuff?
They won't, and it's because there's no recourse against an IRA. So like a Bank of America or some large commercial bank won't, or whatever commercial bank won't do it because there's no recourse. If the IRA doesn't pay back, they can't do anything. But if the IRA takes out a non-recourse loan, the lender can't come against you personally. They can't come against any other assets in the IRA, but they can take the subject property. So they have some recourse. It's called non-recourse, but you know that's what you've got. You can come against the subject property and take that as a lender.
Got it. Okay, awesome. Questions for you around. So I've done this it's been a while. What are your investing in actual businesses? I know that there is, again, personal benefit, but let's say I was trying to either buy a business or invest in a friend's business or a third party arm's length transaction. How have you seen that happen? Is it common? Is it uncommon?
No, it's not so common. And the reason is because there is another kind of tax, and I kind of alluded to it before, UBIT, unrelated business income tax. So when your IRA invests in an active business, that income can be taxable, unrelated business income tax. So it's, say for example, your IRA invests in a donut shop, and so it's running tax-free or tax-deferred as far as income tax goes. Well, it still has to pay this UBIT tax. So investing in an active business directly is one thing, but if you invest in a business using like a private placement, if you've got someone raising capital to acquire assets, that's more of a passive business, right? But investing in an active business can lead to that tax. So how do you know? You ask your CPA, and you go to the IRS's website, irs.gov, and look up publication 598. You can find it there.
So if that business does kick off the unrelated business taxable income, if that happens, does it violate the IRS, or do you just have to pay the tax?
You just have to pay the tax. It's allowed, yeah, okay. But you pay the tax.
So but the IRA pays the tax, right?
Always IRA pays the expenses. I mean, some like fees or one-time fees associated with IRA-owned assets, you can pay sometimes outside of like your account fees, you can pay personally. But if it has to do directly with the asset, then your IRA pays that fee.
Got it. And this is awesome. So now, what about? So I'm still going back to this Tulsa example, right? So we moved over $80,000. We borrowed $30,000 non-recourse through one of the lenders that would do this for us. We bought this property. We held on to it. So the first year it generates rental income and it has some expenses. So let's assume they were even. Say they generated $10,000 of rental, $12,000 of rental income, so $1,000 a month. Because I'm bad at math, so I keep it as simple as possible. Right? And say it had $12,000 of expenses, so it was a break-even deal. Who pays? Like, is the IRA paying? If the IRA has to come out of pocket to do a new roof, does the IRA have to come out of pocket to do a new roof, or can how does that work?
No, because your IRA can't benefit from you personally, except for contributions. You've got a contribution cap. But no, you're never, ever, ever going to write a check for your IRA owned assets. We had somebody one time, and that's what they did. They got a second lien on their house, their personal home, to put a new roof on their IRA owned property. Like, no, because you can't. What are you going to do? Tear off the roof? And so that was that. You can't unring the bell. So yeah. So no, you don't do anything personally like that. So what you need to do is make sure the IRA can pay the expenses. And if it can't, well, then there are things you can do. You can make a contribution. You can move money over from another account, like another, IRA or 401k or something. There are other things you can do to make up for a shortfall, but it has to come from the IRA, must.
Got it. And then I'm assuming the opposite is already also true, where all the income and the proceeds during the year for rental income goes right back into the IRA.
Yeah, 100% must go back in the IRA. We had someone who had a rental property, and they took their rental income and they put it in another IRA, like across the street at another IRA company, because it just went back in an IRA. They thought it was okay. That's called taking constructive use of your IRA account. And you've just been administrating it yourself, and then your IRA can be dispersed to you, and then because you've misused it. So the proceeds must come back to the IRA that owns the asset. That's really important.
Got it. Awesome. So 3 years go by. I like the income. The property increases in value. We bought it for $100,000. Now I get to sell for $150,000, which is cool. Yeah. What happens? So since this is a retirement vehicle, say it's a traditional self-directed IRA, the taxes are deferred until when I take distribution. So I've got this $50,000 capital gain, whatever the gain is. So it stays in the IRA, in the self-directed account. Is that correct?
It does. Yes, it does.
Okay.
And then you find another asset to invest in.
Okay, awesome. So here's something interesting. What happens if there is litigation, legal action, things like that? Who represents the IRA?
The IRA can hire a third party, so an IRA can hire an attorney, the IRA would pay the fee. Like maybe your IRA invested in a note and you need to have collections. Well, the IRA would pay that collections person to go collect on the debt.
Got it. Okay, awesome. So based on that real estate transaction, that sounds fairly, kind of what you probably see often, right? Anything that you see that is wonky with what can happen that can break that sounds pretty plain.
No, it's something we see it all the time. Yeah. Wonky that can break break the IRA.
Yeah.
Well, constructive use is one of those things. Is deciding that you're the custodian and you're going to move your money wherever you want it to go. That's not okay. Another way is what have we seen? I kind of mentioned a few of those examples already, but I suppose. Taking just using the money or using it for personal use, or we get the phone call often enough like, oh, my IRA owns a house. I've been putting the rent in my own personal bank account, but I do claim it on my income taxes. So I'm claiming it as income. So it should be okay. It's like, no, not okay. Yeah. Prohibited transaction. So that would blow it too.
Got it. Okay. I want to just step away from real estate for 1 second and give people some perspective. We've talked about two other things. We've talked about the business, investing in businesses. Right. Let's talk about that briefly for a second. So you can either if a company, like you said, is raising, even it can be a technology startup, they're raising a convertible note, pick a number. It's $100,000 note. It's convertible to equity. And you say, hey, you know what? I don't have the liquidity in my personal account, but I have $200,000 sitting in TD Ameritrade. I'm going to transfer it over to uDirect. Then you guys say, well, hey, I want to see this convertible note agreement. Like, what the heck is it?
Yes.
Right? Yes. And then you say, hey, this sounds right. Like literally it looks like a note, quacks like a note, seems legit. Okay, you're welcome to. And
it has a principal balance. It has a maturity date, has an interest rate. It describes the payment. Yeah. So it has the elements of a note, right? That's what we're looking at.
Yeah. And so a couple of things can happen there, right? Number one is, let's go with the worst case scenario. Startup investments can vaporize like that. What happens? So I've invested $100,000 into this startup company, and 3 years later they don't make it, and my convertible note now, based on the company winding down operations, is worth zero.
Yeah.
What what happens then?
We get the call, oh, okay, well, the company didn't work, so just zero out my account and just close it. It's like, no, sorry, it doesn't work that way. So what has to happen then is that you get an evaluator. Evaluator gives us, it's like an appraiser, but there'll be a business valuator to evaluate that business, say, yes, here's a report, the value is truly zero, because we're not valuators. That would make us fiduciaries, which is a duty that we don't have. So when we get this third-party report, we can say, okay, it's zero. And if the IRS comes and says, why did you zero out this account? We can say, well, here's this third-party report that says it was a worthless asset. We write it down to zero, and then we can close your account or close out the asset. Maybe you've got other assets in the account you want to leave, and that's fine. But as far as that asset, we'll close that one out.
Got it. Okay, cool. So big takeaway there is you just can't call Kaaren and be like, hey, that didn't work out, like shut it down, too bad,
We
right? Like
call all the time. Well, I mean, because not all the time. I mean, mostly the assets do perform because people do due diligence. You know,
right.
You have to say that 3 times fast. But you go on our website or go to FINRA, NASA, which is NASAA, the SEC's website, the Department of Business Oversight in California, where I am. Google these people and put the word fraud afterward, or find out, am I going to invest with or lend my IRA, my hard-earned IRA money, am I going to lend it to someone who's had sanctions against them or even been incarcerated? We've seen that. So make sure you know who you're investing with, that you've researched them, and that you've researched the deal, and you understand how you're going to get your money back out of the deal. So you understand how it's going in, but you also understand the exit strategy. And that's a conversation to have with the asset sponsors. Like, talk to me about the exit strategy here and make sure that you're on board with that.
Yeah. I think that the 2 things that you said there were really, key and crucial. One is, if you are investing in something that you don't know a lot about, I think that it's totally okay to get a criminal report or look at. I mean, it's your money, and you're required.
Well, you need to.
And if the principal of that deal is unwilling to do that, that should give you a little pause.
That would be a red flag.
Yeah, like, hey, well, why wouldn't you do that,
yes.
right? And so, especially on. So we talk about companies, and the opposite is true, where the company does really well, they get the exit, all the exit money flows right in through to the self-directed that account, and then now you can either reinvest those proceeds or take distributions whenever you're ready to take them. Correct?
That's exactly right. Yes, that's precisely how it works. It's not that, doesn't have to be that complicated. You know, the process is open, fund, invest. Really, 3 things: open, fund, invest. All the proceeds come back into the IRA that owns the asset. All the expenses are paid for by the IRA that owns the asset. When you've got real estate, you want to leave a pad in there for expenses, because real estate, there's always something. You need a new something always on a house.
Right. There's a lot of real estate syndicators out there. And I know you've talked to more syndicators than you want to talk to, right?
No, bring them on.
And syndicators come in a variety of shapes and flavors, right? So let's talk about I'll take a multifamily syndicator, for example, right? So, hey, we're gonna raise $100,000 slugs into a LP unit that they're gonna go and invest in a 30-unit building or something like that.
Sure. Yes. All the time.
Yeah. So generally how that works is the LP unit is a vehicle. You get to be a equity owner in that vehicle. They go and then they may leverage it, they may not leverage it, but you own a piece of that LP unit, right?
Yeah. Yes. And you bring up a good point. If I can, I'll let you finish your thought, but
No, go for it.
Okay. Well, you just mentioned that, okay, you're going to become an equity owner. Your IRA is going to become an equity owner in this deal. And you talked about maybe they'll take on debt, maybe they won't take on debt. If they take on debt, guess what? That UDFI tax passes through to your IRA, and it'll be described to you on the K1. So if your IRA invests as an equity partner in one of these deals, and the asset sponsor is taking on leverage in the deal, that can pass on UDFI to your IRA. And then it's filing the 990T and seeing if you owe tax.
Yeah, so I think that the lesson there is, you're going to get the K1, make sure that your CPA gets the K1 so that they can,
Yes,
whatever the box that shows up, they know how to handle that number, right?
exactly. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Let's go to a different asset class. You talked about precious metals, which is, to me, it seems just like the other asset classes.
Yeah.
Well, but it's speculative in a lot of ways. My question is, have you seen direct investing where someone actually owns gold bullion? Have you seen, like, how does that work?
Yeah, well, maybe you've heard about the gold at home thing. There was this commercial for a while, like some guy sitting on his armchair and he says his IRA owns gold, he gets to keep it at home. No, you don't. The IRS came out with a letter. You don't get personal possession of your assets. It's just like there's money in my IRA. I'm going to take personal possession of my cash. No, you're not. So if your IRA owns assets, like for our account holders who have precious metals, we custody those. We in a secure, facility. So you don't have access to them. You don't get to have personal possession of your own metal that your IRA owns.
All right, this is super. So what you're saying, there's two parts of the puzzle. One, I can buy my IRA. Sorry, my IRA can buy, diamonds. Make it fun. My IRA
diamonds,
can buy.
No, diamonds are a collectible. You can't. That would be disallowed.
Oh, wow, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So my IRA can buy silver,
yes.
right?
Yes.
So my IRA buys silver plates or whatever. I don't know. I wish I'd bought
coins or ingots. Yes.
Yeah. And then once they buy it, we can't have personal possession, so that has to be held by the custodian. And then as and when the beneficiary chooses to dispose off those assets, they enter into a contract to dispose off those assets, and then the custodian releases the property. Is that right?
Right. Yes, and there's a sale. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So anything wonky in the precious metals world that we need to keep in mind?
There just was a really big case, and a really big case where there was some fraud doing with seniors and precious metals, where the precious metals were being sold to seniors, kind of high pressure sales, and being sold for more than they were worth. So again, don't invest without doing your due diligence. If somebody wants you to pay X dollars for gold, Google it. What is the spot price of gold? And make sure you're not paying more. And so that gold company is no longer, in business, and they stole from people. But it's also people that were, just vulnerable, like seniors, very elderly people who may not have completely understood what was going on. And that's terrible when seniors get stolen from, especially their retirement funds.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. And there were some other all different kinds of people got stolen from, but particularly seniors. So make sure that you're not paying too much and do your homework.
Let me ask you about this. So this may or may not be an issue, but how does life insurance work when it comes to IRAs?
So when they came up with IRAs, the IRS said, okay, you can use these IRAs to invest in anything except life insurance and collectibles. So no diamonds, no insurance policies, no fine wine collection, no collectible cars, no collectible coins. So your IRA can invest in precious metals, but if it's called numismatic, if it's a collectible coin, it is not allowed in an IRA. So that's how that works.
Okay, that said, like, what have you've seen a lot of interesting things go, that an IRA is invested in. Like, what would be like a few things that you've seen that are like, that was interesting. I'd never seen that before.
Well, honestly, it's really pretty, I'll tell you the truth. It's pretty run of the mill. We don't get a lot of crazy things. I mean, some custodians will let you invest, for example, in racehorses because they are an asset, but every custodian can choose what assets they will and won't custody. They can say that's not administratively feasible for us to custody. It's a business decision. We're just not going to hold that asset, so that's an IRA custodian can do that. So some will hold racehorses and some won't. So that would be one example, or, mango trees or, different kinds of things, like tree farms and things. So it just depends on what assets the custodian will custody. But mostly what we see is lots of private placements, notes, people investing in performing and non-performing debt, straight up real estate, raw land, those kinds of deals. Lots and lots of notes for sure.
Got it. Okay. So all that said, right? So I mean, let's make it super practical for folks, because I think you, if knowing what you know now, and you have children, we talked about that briefly. No one teaches us this stuff. It's amazing if it's a total win, especially in the United States, just if a teenager understands the power of compounding, and especially the power of compounding in a tax advantaged vehicle. That itself, you're like, hey, you know that?
Yeah.
Amazing. Like you're already top 1%, right?
Right. Yes, you are.
Yeah. My question is, let's say we have a I'm making up. We have Jimmy. Jimmy's 30 years old. He's had a couple of different professional positions, and he's had a chance to roll over his 401k a couple of times. So he has call it a traditional or a Roth IRA vehicle.
Probably a traditional,
traditional vehicle. What would your advice to not financial advice? What would be your structural consideration advice to Jimmy? Be saying, hey, think about, how could Jimmy think about, using the IRA as more, not just as I'm going to invest in XLK and the SPY SPDR, but is there more to it? Because I don't think we're offered this as an option most of the time.
Well, one thing that we are offered is the internet. So I would go to a meetup group and start, I would recommend, number one, networking with other investors. What are they doing? What are they investing in? What kind of returns do they see? And as you spend more time with investors and asset sponsors, you see them doing deal after deal. And if you're going to invest with somebody, you talk to people that have invested with them before. How did they treat you? What was the return like? Did they communicate with you? Did you get the funds that you were promised? That sort of thing. So you just start doing your homework. I think there's some point where we began our life, my kids call it adulting, where the light kind of turns on, like, hey, I'm probably not going to be 20 forever, so maybe I should think about the future, Hey, look at mom and dad over there, look what they're doing. So the light bulb kind of comes on, hey, maybe I should plan for the future. I think we all heard the 3 little pigs, and we all want to build our house out of stone so that we can last the storm, right? So when you start getting to that point, it's like, you're about there when the thought, cool minivan, runs through your head, If you've said that ever, even only to yourself, you're at that point, you can start thinking about saving for retirement. It's never too soon, because guess what? You're going to get there like a freight train. It happens so fast. And then now it's time to retire. And man, you have to be your own best friend. You've got to save money. In fact, go today, write a check to yourself, to your IRA, to your retirement account, put money in there. Maybe you'll get a tax break when it comes, time to file your taxes, but you have to save for later. It's just too crucial. I don't know how you could possibly have enough money, because you're saving at today's rate, and then you've got inflation, and it's too much to consider. So we have to take care of ourselves.
Yeah. We have a great CPA, and he taught me this early on, close to 10, 15 years ago, when we had our first exit. And he said to me, he's like, Sharran, the question you should be asking, even if I don't bring this up, which is pretty cool, right? Like, nice of him to say that. He's like, the question you should be asking me is, because when I send you a tax bill at the end of the year that you need to go to the websites and like write a big check, he goes, I don't mind you doing that, because I'd rather, don't get excited. The first lesson is like, don't get excited about getting a refund. It means we didn't optimize you well. So he's like, I'd rather the money sit in your account than in the IRS, which I thought I appreciate. But the second was, he said, Sharran, I need you to ask me this question, which is, hey, are there any tax advantage vehicles that I can contribute to before, April 15th or whatever the date is, that will change the taxable that I owe? Can I actually pay myself or pay my IRA with the tax advantage vehicle? And I think a lot of times we don't, especially if you're using TurboTax or whatever, you're not asking that question.
No.
And so the first thing is, I think as our taxes get complex, we're not using WebMD for our doctors. I think we should consider using a CPA as our taxes get a little bit more complex.
You need advisors. You do. Yeah.
And I still remember my CPA saying, like, and so every year when he sent me a tax bill, I asked him the same thing. I'm like, hey, do you remember you told me to ask you this question, which is, are there any tax advantage vehicles that I need to write a check to before, that will affect my bill? And He's like, oh yeah, but I already processed all of those. Here are the numbers. And I think in modern software, they can hit 3 buttons and tell you, how it actually impacts. So don't feel like, for the person listening, don't feel pressure that they're going to do more math. They're literally hitting 2 buttons saying SEP or traditional, and they're giving you a number.
Sure. And so let's talk about those kinds of vehicles. I mean, it could be a traditional, a Roth, a SEP, which is a simplified employee pension, a simple IRA, which people don't use very much anymore, which is a savings incentive match plan for employees, an inherited IRA. If somebody passes away and you're their beneficiary, you get their inherited IRA, or maybe a solo 401k. If you're a business owner, you don't have any full-time employees in any of the companies that you own, a solo K could be for you. All these different vehicles. And then if you want to graduate on, there's 401ks where you work, maybe even a defined benefit plan if you're a high wage earner, if you own a company and so forth, and you can stick quite a bit of money into a defined benefit plan. But all of these are different ways to, like you said, tax deferred vehicles. It's a game, right? You got to play the game to win with the IRS. You want to pay what you owe, but you can also use the rules to save, because the IRS is incentivizing you to use these vehicles.
Yeah. I remember my business school professor a tax professor said to me, he says, just cool saying, he's like, the ignorance of the law is no excuse, right? Like, I was like, that hits you like a 2x4 sometimes.
Yeah.
Last technical question, when you mentioned defined benefit plans, maybe there's pensions, et cetera. Are there any, is there collaboration, or is there an opportunity to do self-directed with those vehicles as well?
Well, understand what we do, what the self-directed IRA is about is an individual plan. But these plans like the 401k, full-blown 401k, 403b, 457, a defined benefit plan, they're employer plans. We call them ERISA plans. It's all under ERISA, but we call them ERISA plans. So what we do are the plans for really pretty much one person, except for the SEP. We do the IRAs. Now, when you go into the other world of having an employee plan, like here at uDirect IRA Services, we have a 401k for our employees. That is not self-directed because, for liability reasons, So there are different kinds of plans. It's a different world. The IRA world is one world where you're just doing an individual plan. Bringing in employees is a different world of rules and accounts.
Got it. Okay, awesome. So parting thoughts for someone that has some IRA investments. It was either handed to them, or their parents started a little Roth for them growing up, or whatever. And
what a good thing.
Yeah, and and this is a self. They're hearing about self-directed for the first time. They're like, wow, I didn't know that I could use my retirement vehicle to invest in real estate, or invest in notes, or precious metals, etc. If you're talking to one of them right now and they're listening, what would be like the first step for them to just kind of get into the process and learn more?
Well, listen to podcasts like this. This is great because it starts getting your brain working. The gears are moving, like, oh, well, what if this, and you start coming up with questions, and you can find out the answers to those questions. You can call us and we'll answer your questions about self-directed IRAs. But where am I going to find investments? Go to Meetup. Where are you going to find opportunities? Talk to people. There are other things like there's a website called Bigger Pockets, and it's a whole community of investors, and everybody loves them. So, so much information. There is a wealth of information to get started, and you're not alone. You're with so many people and right with you. And it's also not the kind of thing that you do by yourself. You don't really do this in a vacuum. You really need a community, and you need advisors. You need a lawyer, you need a CPA, your tax advisor, and insurance person for sure if you're investing in real estate. So many different kinds of advisors. Of course, a self-directed IRA person.
Yeah, that's a good trend. So I'd love for you to maybe just do you are a very important piece of the puzzle in the self-directed ecosystem. Can you give us a very quick kind of overview of kind of what your company does, so that people can say, I see where Kaaren and uDirect actually fit?
Well, we're the point of contact for your whole account. It's sort of like when you go get an insurance policy, you go to the insurance agent and you sit down with them and you have a relationship with them, and like, this is what I want to do. Of course, we're not advisor. You're telling us what you want to invest in. And that way we're like escrow. When you're buying a house, you go to escrow and you say, hey, this is the house I'm buying, process this. We're sort of like that too. But we're, we want to hear about your investment. We want to talk to you about, any kind of issues, like account issues, like, oh, there should be a penny over here, it's over here, some things like that. How do I log in? Those administrative things. But really, like, this is my deal. This is what I'm doing. Is this a prohibited transaction? And please process this so that my retirement plan, my retirement savings can start to grow, so that when I'm ready to retire, I have plenty.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Kaaren, where can folks find more about you, more about uDirect? What's the best place for them to go?
It's our website to start with. It's the letter U, uDirectIRA.com, uDirectIRA.com. We're on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram, and where are we not? We're all over the place. So and there's a community there too. So that's the best way. info@uDirectIRA.com. And again, I do offer to send that list of non-recourse lenders to anybody who wants to, call these people and pick their brains about non-recourse lending.
Awesome. Can't thank you enough for spending time with us. I know this was for some folks, this can be a, wow, that got technical, but that's the point, right? Like a lot of my audience has been like, hey, let's get practical and bring this to life. So thank you for, walking through random scenarios that we didn't even talk about and bring stuff to life. Really, really appreciate you spending time with us.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.